So welcome for another knowledge clip about organizational behavior. And today we'll talk about Fordism, and this in the light of the topic of structuring. Because we ask ourselves, why do we humans structure things? And as was previously said, I would argue there would be about three functional reasons for doing so. Namely, to make life easy rather than difficult, to make life beautiful rather than ugly, and in some cases to organize your mind. And there's also some dysfunctional reasons for doing that, namely creating a false sense of certainty, or also the habit of, saying we've always done it that way. Henry Ford. Well, what did he do? First of all, if we look at car manufacturing before Henry Ford, it was basically a bunch of people, a team of people who were designing a car, and you had sophisticated engineers doing the engines and the parts and a whole team dedicated to one specific car. And this could take several weeks, maybe several months before the car was made. The car was also very expensive, so only the wealthy could afford it. Now, what did Henry Ford do? First of all, he studied a lot of Taylor's ideas. He noticed how scientific management, how that all efficiency was going on. And at the same time, he was impressed by new possibilities in technology. And Henry Ford put himself the goal to actually create a car that his own working men could afford, could buy. So he wanted to create cars efficiently, low price, and be able to produce them, again, efficiently. So we could say that Fordism is actually a next step of Taylorism when you do industrial mass production. Key word here. We want to have many cars coming out. So he used new technology for this, namely the mechanized assembly line. You may remember the funny Charlie Chaplin movie, Modern Times, where you actually have these things moving around the assembly line and then workers standing there and doing, for example, one particular movement. So you had something called single-purpose machine tools. This basically means different tools that do one thing, like for example, color a specific area of the car, or screw on tire. Very simple things. And he also, of course, was inspired by the time and motion techniques. What are time and motion techniques? Well, again, when we go back to Taylor, remember with the people who were doing coal shoveling, Taylor really observed, okay, if you shovel coal, how much coal do you put on your shovel? How much time does it take you to walk from wherever you're taking the coal to the place where you are putting it out? How far is that? How many breaks do you take? How do you feel physically? So taking all of that into account and then putting it in a form that is much more efficient. After this presentation, I invite you also to look at a General Motors movie on how they introduced the efficiency of methodology. Now, one of the great things of Henry Ford's system was that you could have lowly educated staff. I mean, those were the days when massive amounts of immigrants from Europe, mostly, were coming into the US. Many of them spoke Italian, Spanish, French, Dutch, what have you, not English. So it was hard for those people to find a job. But Henry Ford said, well, with these single-purpose machine tools, all the worker really needs to know is to make one particular movement. And that is something he can learn maximum in a day, but probably in an hour. And if they keep repeating this, then they just get faster at it, but it's really easy. So lowly educated staff could easily work in his factories, and they could produce high output and a reasonably guaranteed quality. Again, compare this to a team of mostly engineers and experts all designing a beautiful Bentley and working on it, being highly paid, having to understand cars, having to understand where everything fits. Where here, basically, it goes by itself. So, what did Henry Ford do? Well, several things. First of all, his philosophy was continuous improvement. That's a little bit different from Frederick Taylor's idea. Taylor believed there was one best way. Now, I don't want to confuse you with this, but this has to do with scientific thinking, where in the scientific thinking of the times of Taylor, there was sort of the idea, something is the best. But Henry Ford said continuous improvement, which means, well, every week or every so many times you ask yourself, how can we do this better? For example, in the beginning, Henry Ford didn't have an assembly line. It's just a moment when I think they had a cord on a car and somebody pulled it slowly, and then they had people fixing things while the car was moving, that idea come up. So continuously busy with this. Henry Ford also introduced fixed wages. Previously, you were paid per car, per something that was completed, but he introduced the fixed wages. Of course, in those days, so we're talking the early 20th century, there was criticism on Henry Ford's ideas, especially the fact that they were repetitive jobs, short cycle repetitive jobs, which really, if you're doing the same movement time and time again, first of all, it may cause problems with your body, but also it destroyed craftsmanship. The workers in Ford's factories cannot make a car themselves. They don't understand how an engine works. They understand how to put a plug somewhere. So it also de-skilled jobs. The reason I am showing you all these different effects that Henry Ford's system had is to make you realize that structuring something in a new way always has effects. Some effects are beneficiary, like for example saying, oh, you can produce more cars more cheaply. But on the other hand, you could say, well, what's the effect on workers, on how they see work? So all these new questions come into place. And please realize, nowadays when you visit a factory, or when you visit a McDonald's, for example, you notice in the way things are being mechanized or treated that, again, they were inspired by Taylor, they were inspired by Ford, and maybe similar issues in terms of human resources, in terms of people, play there. So, there are some essential differences between Taylor's view and Ford's view. For example, in the approach to machinery, Taylor himself worked a lot with what was already there. So he was much more the person that said, okay, here are the tools, here are the machines. Now, how can we move people around so that things work more efficiently? Or how can we set up the situation so that it's more efficient? Like setting up a kitchen in a particular way, with the tools in a particular way. Or here for students in hotel management, I'm sure the chefs in the kitchen have everything set up in a very clear way to maximize efficiency, just like Taylor. Ford, being an engineer, was of course Also, and much more busy with new machinery. How could we introduce a new machine here that can take over a job from a laborer? Nowadays, when you go into a car factory, you will maybe see only one or two people working there, mostly operating a computer. All the rests will be robots and robotic arms moving things around. So again, the approach to technology and work design is different, namely that Taylor, as previously said, was reorganizing work and the labor processes all the time, whereas what Ford was doing was mechanizing the work processes. And then also in terms of the pace of work, namely the speed of work, in the case of Taylor, this was still set by workers, so by checking how fast workers were doing, or their supervisors. But here, the pace was set by machinery. Again, looking at Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, well, if the conveyor belt goes more rapidly than you go, you have to speed up, or in another case, you will be replaced by somebody else who can do it as fast as you. Yes, a scream by Gottfried Helnwein, because this was probably and definitely also the reaction by some of the workers that, this was a very stressful situation. Going back to our previous slide, always take this one again. Why do we structure? The three functional reasons and some of the dysfunctional reasons. Now, next topic, organizing, structuring, organizing. And we're giving you a few textbook definitions of organization. So for example, Uzinski and Buchanan say that an organization like McDonald's, like Deutsche Bank, like Hilton Hotels is a social arrangement. Yeah, people, social. For achieving controlled performance. There's a particular performance. We want to have some sort of result. We want to sell 1,000 hamburgers. And in the pursuit of some collective goals. Another way of saying this is that organizations are social units, or human groupings, that are deliberately constructed and reconstructed to seek specific goals. But I especially like to say, well, a bunch of people come together under a specific label. You work for General Motors, you work for the NHTV, and you produce some product or you offer a service. There are many organizational theorists, but in this presentation we'll talk about the work of Max Weber. And first, I want to start with the three types of authority that Weber saw. So Weber said when we look at leaders, there's three types: traditional, charismatic, and legitimate. Traditional is the king. The king can be competent or incompetent, but he's the boss because he happens to be the king. Charismatic leader could be somebody very inspiring, a Jesus, a Mohammed, a Lenin, people who inspire people, very charismatic. And or there could be a legitimate leader. And Max Weber, again in this context of science and scientific management, said, well, let's find a leadership structure that is legitimate, where people see their boss and they know, well, this boss is capable. This boss knows what he's doing. Most of the time it was a guy. And rather than having a king who's incompetent and who kind of randomly assigns things according to their own whims and wishes, we will have actually rule by office or rule by officials. So clearly, objectively put down. And Weber also said that a bureaucracy is actually the one best way to structure an organization. And then again, we can ask ourselves, why do we do what a particular manager tells us to do? Well, the answer is simple: because of logical relevance and shared belief. In other words, this guy really knows what he's doing, and they have assigned him to that job because he knows what he's doing, and he's doing this all in the best interest of the company. So of course we're going to do what he says. Put in a more fancy way, the theory of bureaucracy is that it's a legal, rational type of authority, not whimsical, underpinning a form of organization structure that is characterized by a specialization of labor, a specific authority hierarchy, and a formal set of rules and rigid promotion and selection criteria. You may hear specific here very often, and formal, because again, what Weber's intention was to make a system fair, honest. Let's get everything clear. Let's get it written out. So specialization of labor. If you're good in sales, you sell. If you're good in motivating teams, you motivate. If you're good in adding up numbers, you be the accountant. A specific authority hierarchy, where you have a president, you have a vice president, then you have 5 directors, then you have assistant directors, then you have deputy managers, etc., etc. Clear, specific. And the rules are so clear that to get promoted, you clearly know what you need to do. I need to go from boss -1 to boss and to boss +1. This is what you need to do. So there was quite some strength in bureaucracy. Namely, things were standardized. The rules, the regulations, the procedures, everybody knew what was going on. Again, think back at the times before Weber, where an aristocracy, for example, could abuse a peasant, and there would not be any legal problems. But if the peasant would do something wrong with the aristocrat, oh, then maybe they would even be killed. So where do we see Weber today? Well, everywhere, or at least often. Look at our university. In our university, we spend a lot of time writing our exam regulations and telling students what their rights are, what they need to do in case they disagree with the grade they got on an exam, etc., etc. At our university, for staff members, it is clear what a tutor does, what a lecturer does, how you become a senior lecturer, how you become theme manager. It's explained in scales. There's something, the labor laws and agreements that exactly scale everything in, and they even say what amounts of money are attached to that. You could say, well, sometimes it's a bit rigid. Yes, maybe, but at the same time, it makes everything clear for everybody. In the next clip, we'll go over some typical organizational terminology like span of control, chain of command, organizational chart, line, staff, and functional relationships.